My name is Penelope Ashford, and I'm 68 years old. For most of my life, I believed that being a good mother meant giving everything, my time, my energy, my resources, to ensure my children had better lives than I did. I raised my daughter, Cassandra, to be independent and strong. But somewhere along the way, I think I confused love with enabling. That realization came to me on a cold Tuesday morning in November, when hot coffee scalded my arm and finally burned away the fog I'd been living in for far too long. I lived in a modest but comfortable home in suburban Connecticut, a place I'd worked 3 decades to pay off. The mortgage was finally cleared 5 years ago, right around the time my husband Gregory passed away from a sudden heart attack. Since then, the house had felt too big, too quiet, but it was mine. Every corner held a memory. Gregory's reading chair by the window, the kitchen where we'd cooked Sunday dinners together, the garden he'd planted that I still tended each spring. Cassandra was my only child, 42 years old, twice divorced, and mother to my grandson, Trevor, who had just turned 19. After her second divorce, Cassandra had moved back into my house temporarily, or so she said. That was 3 years ago. Temporary had become permanent, and what started as helping family had slowly transformed into something that gnawed at my peace of mind. That morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through bills and my monthly budget. My pension and Social Security covered my needs comfortably, but I was careful. I'd learned early in life that financial security meant planning, not spending recklessly. Cassandra walked in with Trevor trailing behind her, both of them dressed like they were heading somewhere expensive. Trevor wore brand new sneakers that I knew cost over $200. I'd seen the box in the trash last week. "Mom, I need your credit card," Cassandra said without preamble, holding out her hand like it was the most natural request in the world. I looked up from my papers, already feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever these conversations started. "What for, Cassandra?" "Trevor needs a new laptop for college. His old one is slow, and he can't do his assignments properly." I glanced at Trevor, who avoided my eyes, suddenly very interested in his phone screen. "Trevor, didn't you just get a laptop last year? The one I helped pay for?" He shrugged, still not meeting my gaze. "It's outdated, Grandma. I need something with better specs for my graphic design classes." "Outdated after 1 year?" I kept my voice gentle, but firm. "Trevor, that laptop cost $1,500. It should last you through your entire degree." Cassandra's expression hardened. "Mom, are you really going to nickel and dime your own grandson's education? We're not asking for the world here." "But you are," I thought. "You always are." This wasn't the first time. In the past 6 months alone, I'd paid for Trevor's car insurance twice when Cassandra forgot, covered the cost of her dental work, because she claimed her insurance wouldn't, and purchased groceries that somehow never lasted more than a few days, despite it being just the 3 of us. "Cassandra, I love you both, but I can't keep doing this. I'm living on a fixed income. Every time I turn around, there's another expense, another emergency that somehow becomes my responsibility." Her face flushed red. "Your responsibility? Mom, we're your family. What else are you spending your money on? You never go anywhere. You don't do anything. Why can't you help us?" The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I do help. I've been helping constantly, but this has to stop. I need to maintain my savings, pay my own bills. "You're being selfish," Cassandra shouted, and Trevor finally looked up, his expression caught between embarrassment and expectation. "You have this whole house, all this money just sitting in the bank, and you won't help your own grandson get ahead in life." I stood up, my hands trembling slightly. At 68, I'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no. "I'm not giving you my credit card, Cassandra. If Trevor needs a laptop, he can get a part-time job like millions of other college students. If you need money, you can work more hours instead of going out to brunch 3 times a week." What happened next occurred so fast that I barely had time to process it. Cassandra grabbed her coffee mug from the counter, a large ceramic mug filled with coffee I'd made for her that morning, and before I could react, she threw it directly at me. The hot liquid hit my left forearm, and pain seared through my skin instantly. The mug shattered against the table, sending ceramic shards across the floor. I gasped, stumbling backward as the burning sensation intensified. Through the shock, I heard Cassandra screaming, "Give me the money or leave. Just leave. Get out of our lives if you're going to be this way." Trevor stood frozen, his mouth open, But he said nothing. He didn't check if I was okay. He didn't tell his mother to stop. He just stood there. The pain in my arm was nothing compared to the pain in my chest. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd carried, raised, sacrificed for, and saw a stranger, a cruel, entitled stranger, who had just physically hurt me in my own home. I walked to the sink with as much dignity as I could muster, turned on the cold water, and held my scalded arm under the stream. Neither of them moved. Neither of them apologized. The silence in that kitchen was deafening, broken only by the sound of running water and my own ragged breathing. After a few minutes, when the initial burning had dulled to a persistent throb, I dried my arm carefully, turned off the water, and walked past both of them without a word. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, closed the door, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not from the pain of the burn, but from the devastating realization that I had lost my daughter long before that coffee cup was thrown. I had just been too afraid to see it. Chapter 2. The Decision. I sat on the edge of my bed for nearly an hour, my burned arm throbbing with each heartbeat, staring at the photographs on my dresser. Gregory smiled back at me from our wedding day, young and full of hope. Another photo showed Cassandra as a little girl, missing her 2 front teeth, hugging me tight during a trip to Cape Cod. Where had that sweet child gone? Or had I simply been blind to who she was becoming all along? The burn on my arm had already started blistering. I knew I should treat it properly, maybe even go to urgent care, but I couldn't move yet. I was paralyzed by a grief that had nothing to do with physical pain. This wasn't the first time Cassandra had been cruel, but it was the first time she'd been violent. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. I heard voices downstairs, Cassandra and Trevor talking in normal tones, as if nothing had happened. I caught fragments of their conversation through the floor. Cassandra was on the phone, apparently making plans to meet friends for lunch. Trevor was laughing at something on his computer. The mundane normalcy of it all made my stomach turn. They weren't sorry. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. I carefully tended to my burn, applying antibiotic ointment and wrapping it loosely with gauze from my bathroom cabinet. My hands were steadier now. Something had shifted inside me during that hour of sitting and thinking. The fog that had surrounded my judgment for years was finally clearing, and what I saw made me feel both heartbroken and strangely calm. I had enabled this. I had taught Cassandra that her wants were more important than my needs. I had shown Trevor that manipulating your grandmother was acceptable behavior. I had allowed them to treat my home like a hotel and my bank account like their personal fund. And worse, I had convinced myself that this was what love looked like. Constant sacrifice with no reciprocation. Endless giving with no gratitude. Gregory wouldn't have tolerated this. I could almost hear his voice in my head. Penny, love shouldn't hurt this much. Family doesn't mean letting people destroy you. I picked up my phone and made a call I'd been putting off for months. My younger brother, Martin, lived in Maine with his wife. We talked every few weeks, and I'd been increasingly vague about my living situation because I knew what he'd say. Now, I needed to hear it. Penny, Martin answered on the second ring, his warm voice immediately soothing. This is a nice surprise. How are you? Martin, I need advice. My voice cracked slightly, and I heard his tone shift immediately to concern. What happened? I told him everything. The constant financial demands, the disrespect, and finally, that morning's incident with the coffee. When I described the burn on my arm, I heard him inhale sharply. Penny, that's assault. That's not just disrespect anymore. Did you call the police? No, I can't. She's my daughter. She's a grown woman who physically attacked her elderly mother. Penny, you need to get away from this situation. Today. It's my house, Martin. I'm not the one who should leave. There was a long pause. You're right. You're absolutely right. So what are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I couldn't keep living like this, walking on eggshells in my own home, watching my savings drain away, being treated like an ATM instead of a person. But Cassandra was still my daughter. Trevor was still my grandson. Could I really do what I was thinking of doing? I'm going to ask them to leave, I said quietly. I'm going to tell them they have to find their own place. Good. And if they refuse, then I'll make them leave. Legally. If I have to. Martin was quiet for a moment. I'm proud of you, Penny. This is hard, but it's the right thing. And listen, if you need a place to stay while this gets sorted out, You're always welcome here. Beth and I would love to have you." After we hung up, I sat with my decision for a while longer, testing it in my mind, looking for weaknesses or second thoughts. I found none, only a deep sadness and an even deeper certainty that this was necessary. I had spent 68 years being the person who held everything together, who sacrificed, who endured. It was time to stop enduring and start living. I opened my laptop and began researching tenant rights in Connecticut. Since Cassandra and Trevor had been living with me for 3 years, they were legally considered tenants, even without a formal lease or rent payments. That meant I couldn't just throw them out. I needed to follow proper eviction procedures. The thought of having to legally evict my own family made me want to cry again, but I pushed the emotion down. This was what had to happen. I spent the rest of that afternoon making calls and taking notes. I spoke to a lawyer who specialized in family housing disputes. She was kind but direct. I would need to provide 30 days written notice, and if they didn't leave voluntarily after that period, I'd have to file for formal eviction through the courts. The whole process could take 2 to 3 months. "Mrs. Ashford," the lawyer said gently, "I want you to understand that this might get ugly. Family evictions often do. Are you prepared for that?" "I don't think I have a choice anymore," I replied. "You always have a choice. The question is which choice you can live with." I knew which one I could live with. What I couldn't live with was more of the same. More verbal abuse. More financial manipulation. More feeling like a stranger in my own home. More coffee cups thrown at me. That evening, I composed the formal notice. I kept it simple and unemotional, stating that they had 30 days to vacate the premises. I printed 2 copies, signed both, and placed them in envelopes with their names. Tomorrow morning, I would hand them over. Tonight, I would pack a bag and drive to Martin's house in Maine. I couldn't stay here while they processed this news. I couldn't be present for the initial rage, the accusations, the inevitable attempts to manipulate me into changing my mind. I needed distance and support. Martin and Beth would provide both. As I packed my suitcase, including important documents and some sentimental items I didn't want left behind, I heard Cassandra come home. She'd been gone all afternoon and evening. I heard her call out, "Mom, are you still here?" in a tone that suggested she half hoped I'd left for good. I didn't answer. I continued packing quietly, moving around my bedroom with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd packed many suitcases in her life, for family vacations, hospital stays with Gregory, visits to see relatives. This felt different. This felt like escape. By 10 o'clock, the house was quiet. I waited until midnight, then carried my suitcase down to my car as silently as possible. The November air was frigid, my breath forming white clouds in the darkness. I placed the 2 envelopes on the kitchen table where they'd be impossible to miss in the morning, held together by the salt shaker that had been a wedding gift from Gregory's mother. I took one last look at my kitchen, the scene of that morning's betrayal, and walked out to my car. The engine started smoothly, and as I backed out of my driveway, I didn't look back at the house. I couldn't. If I did, I might lose my nerve. The drive to Maine took 4 hours. I arrived at Martin's house at 4 in the morning, exhausted emotionally and physically. But when he opened the door in his bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a tight hug, I finally felt safe for the first time in years. Chapter 3. The calm before Martin and Beth's home was everything mine hadn't been in years. Peaceful, warm, and full of genuine affection. They lived in a small coastal town called Harpswell, in a charming 2-story house with a view of Casco Bay. The sound of seagulls and waves replaced the tension I'd been living with, and for the first few days, I did nothing but sleep, read, and take long walks along the rocky shore. Neither Martin nor Beth pressured me to talk about what had happened. They simply made space for me, literally and emotionally. Beth set up their guest room with fresh linens and flowers from her garden. Martin made sure I had coffee exactly how I liked it every morning. They treated me like I mattered, like my presence was wanted rather than merely tolerated. It was a stark contrast to what I'd been accepting as normal. On my 3rd day there, as Beth and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of orange and purple, she finally broached the subject gently. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," she said, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the evening chill. "But Martin told me what happened. I want you to know that what Cassandra did was wrong. Completely, unequivocally wrong." I nodded. my throat tight. I keep replaying it in my mind. Not just that morning, but everything leading up to it. All the times I should have said no and didn't. All the boundaries I should have set but was too scared to enforce. Why were you scared? It was such a simple question, but it cut right to the heart of everything. Because I was afraid of losing her. I thought that if I didn't give her what she wanted, she'd cut me out of her life, and then I'd be completely alone. Beth reached over and took my hand. Penny, you were already alone. Being in someone's physical presence doesn't mean they're really with you. From what Martin's told me, Cassandra's been gone for a long time. You just kept hoping she'd come back. She was right. I'd been living with ghosts. The ghost of the daughter I'd raised. The ghost of the family I thought we'd be. The reality was so different from the dream that I'd convinced myself to accept the reality as if it were still the dream. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I'd left Connecticut. 23 missed calls from Cassandra. 16 text messages that progressed from angry to panicked to furious. Trevor had called twice but left no voicemails. I hadn't responded to any of them. My lawyer had advised me not to engage until after the 30-day notice period had passed. The messages were predictable. First came denial. Mom, you can't be serious about this. Come home and let's talk. Then anger. How dare you abandon your family like this, after everything we've done for you? That particular message almost made me laugh. Everything they'd done for me. What exactly had they done besides deplete my savings and my spirit? Then came the manipulation. Trevor is devastated. He keeps asking why Grandma doesn't love us anymore. How can you do this to him? And finally, threats. You'll regret this. You're going to end up dying alone in some nursing home with nobody who cares about you. I showed Martin the messages one evening after dinner. He read through them, his jaw clenching tighter with each one. When he finished, he handed my phone back carefully, as if it might explode. Penny, this is textbook emotional abuse. You see that, right? This is exactly the kind of manipulation that's kept you trapped for years. I know, I said quietly. I think I've always known. I just didn't want to admit that my own daughter was capable of this. People are capable of terrible things when they feel entitled. And you've spent years teaching her that she's entitled to everything you have. The truth of that statement settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had taught her that, not intentionally, but through my inability to say no, my fear of conflict, my desperate need to be needed. I'd raised her to believe that my purpose was to serve her needs, and now I was shocked that she actually believed it. Beth joined us in the living room with tea. Have you thought about what happens next, after the 30 days? If they don't leave voluntarily, I file for formal eviction. The lawyer says it could take 2 to 3 months total. During that time, I'll stay here if you'll have me. Of course, Martin said immediately. Stay as long as you need. Years if necessary. It won't be years. One way or another. This will be resolved by spring. And then, I paused, surprised by the thought that had just occurred to me. And then I'm going to live my life. Really live it. Maybe travel. Maybe volunteer. Maybe just sit in my own living room and read books without feeling guilty that I'm not doing something for someone else. Beth smiled. That sounds perfect. You've earned that, Penny. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a list of dreams, small ones and large ones, practical and impractical, places I wanted to see, things I wanted to learn, even simple pleasures like sleeping late without feeling lazy, or buying myself flowers without feeling frivolous. The list grew to 2 pages, and as I wrote, I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. It took me a moment to recognize it. Hope. I was hoping again. Not for Cassandra to change, or for our relationship to magically repair itself. I knew better now. But hoping for myself, for a future that belonged to me, shaped by my choices rather than my obligations. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The days passed peacefully in Harpswell. I helped Beth in her garden, preparing it for winter. I went to Martin's woodworking shop and watched him craft beautiful furniture from raw lumber. I took long drives along the Maine coast, stopping at small towns to explore bookstores and coffee shops. I began to remember who I'd been before I'd become only a mother, only a wife, only a provider. 3 weeks into my 30-day notice period, my lawyer called. Mrs. Ashford, I wanted to update you. I sent a follow-up letter to your home address, and it was returned. The post office indicates that Cassandra has submitted a mail forward to a different address. I think they may have moved out. My heart skipped a beat. Already? Are you sure? I've arranged for a local property inspector to do a drive-by and check if there are any signs of occupancy. I should have an answer within 24 hours. If they've vacated, this becomes much simpler. After we hung up, I sat with this information. Part of me felt relieved. The confrontation I'd been dreading might not happen after all. But another part felt a deep, familiar sadness. They'd left without a word to me. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just gone. The next day, my lawyer confirmed it. The house appeared empty. No cars in the driveway, no lights at night, no movement detected over a 12-hour observation period. She recommended I return to Connecticut to verify and assess any damage. I need to warn you, Mrs. Ashford. When tenants leave under these circumstances, especially in family disputes, they sometimes leave the property in poor condition. You should be prepared for that possibility. I wasn't sure anything could prepare me for what I was about to find. Bars, Chapter 4. The Empty House. Martin insisted on driving me back to Connecticut. You're not walking into that house alone, he said firmly. Whatever state it's in, you'll need support. We left Harpswell early on a gray Saturday morning in mid-December. The drive felt longer than it had a month ago, each mile bringing me closer to whatever awaited me. I tried to prepare myself mentally for the worst. Destroyed furniture, damaged walls, emptied valuables. But underneath those practical concerns was a deeper dread, the finality of what I was about to face. When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked normal from the outside. The lawn needed mowing despite the winter season, and some leaves had accumulated by the front door. But otherwise, nothing seemed amiss. That almost made it worse somehow. The mundane normalcy of the exterior couldn't prepare me for what might wait inside. My hands shook as I unlocked the front door. Martin stayed close behind me. The moment I pushed it open, I knew something was terribly wrong. The smell hit me first. Stale air, rotting food, and something else I couldn't quite identify. I stepped inside, and my breath caught in my throat. The living room was destroyed. Not just messy, but deliberately destroyed. The sofa cushions had been slashed, stuffing pulled out and scattered across the floor. Gregory's reading chair, his favorite chair that I'd kept exactly as he'd left it, was overturned, one leg broken off. Picture frames had been swept from the mantel and lay shattered on the floor, family photos torn or ground under someone's heel. The curtains had been yanked down, the rod bent and dangling. "Oh, Penny," Martin breathed behind me. "I'm so sorry." I couldn't speak. I moved through the house in a daze, each room revealing fresh horrors. The kitchen cabinets hung open, their contents swept onto the floor. Broken dishes everywhere. Food had been left out to rot. Milk curdled in containers on the counter. Meat decomposing in the sink. They'd turned off the refrigerator and left it open, creating a breeding ground for mold and bacteria. Upstairs was worse. My bedroom had been ransacked. The mattress slashed, drawers emptied and thrown across the room. My jewelry box, containing mostly costume jewelry but also my wedding ring and a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother, was gone entirely. They'd spray-painted obscenities on my bedroom wall in bright red paint. Words I won't repeat, each one designed to hurt me as deeply as possible. Cassandra's room and Trevor's room, interestingly, were relatively clean. They'd taken their belongings but left the spaces intact. It was only my personal areas that had been targeted with such vicious intent. I stood in the doorway of my destroyed bedroom and finally allowed myself to cry. Not just tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal. Martin put his arm around me and guided me back downstairs, away from the destruction. "We're calling the police," he said firmly. "This is vandalism. This is a crime." "She's my daughter," I said weakly, the old excuse rising automatically. "She's a criminal," Martin corrected gently but firmly. "And you need to stop protecting her from the consequences of her actions. This isn't love, Penny. This is hatred. And you didn't deserve it." He was right. I knew he was right. This wasn't the impulsive act of an angry moment. This was calculated, deliberate destruction meant to punish me for daring to set boundaries. This was what my daughter thought of me. The police arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers, a middle-aged woman named Officer Delacroix and a younger man named Officer Huang, walked through the house with me. documenting everything with photographs and careful notes. Officer Delacroix's expression grew more troubled with each room we entered. "Mrs. Ashford, I want to be clear with you. This level of destruction goes beyond simple property damage. Combined with the assault you described, the coffee incident, we're looking at potential criminal charges. Assault and battery, malicious destruction of property, possibly theft if items are missing. I don't want to press charges," I said automatically, and then stopped myself. Why was I saying that? Why was I still protecting someone who had done this to me? Actually, I need to think about it. Officer Delacroix nodded, understanding. "Take your time. We'll file this report regardless. If you decide to pursue charges, you'll have the documentation you need. I'd also recommend getting a restraining order, at least temporarily. This kind of vindictive behavior can escalate." After the police left, Martin and I stood in what remained of my kitchen. I felt numb, hollowed out. This house had been my sanctuary, the place Gregory and I had built our life together. Now it felt violated, poisoned by hatred. "You can't stay here tonight," Martin said. "Hell, you shouldn't stay here until it's been professionally cleaned and repaired. Pack what you need: clothes, important documents, anything salvageable that matters to you. You're coming back to Maine with me." As we worked to salvage what we could, I kept finding small devastations that hit harder than the obvious destruction. A quilt my grandmother had made, shredded beyond repair. A photo album from Cassandra's childhood, pages torn out and scattered. Gregory's collection of vintage books, spines broken, pages ripped. But then I found something that made me pause. In the back of my bedroom closet, hidden behind the clothes they'd pulled down and scattered, was a fireproof safe that Gregory had installed years ago. I'd kept my most important documents there: our marriage certificate, birth certificates, property deed, and some cash for emergencies. The safe was untouched, either because they hadn't found it or because they couldn't open it. Inside, everything was intact, including something I'd forgotten about: an envelope containing $5,000 in cash that Gregory had insisted we keep for true emergencies. He'd added to it over the years whenever we had extra money. I'd never touched it, not even after he died, because touching it felt like admitting he was really gone. "Penny, you okay?" Martin called from downstairs. I clutched the envelope, feeling the weight of the bills inside. This money, this safe, this one thing they couldn't destroy. It felt symbolic somehow. They'd taken so much, damaged so much, but they hadn't taken everything. Some part of what Gregory and I had built together remained untouched. "I'm okay," I called back, and I was surprised to realize it was partly true. Yes, I was devastated. Yes, I was heartbroken. But underneath all that pain was something harder, something stronger. I was furious. For years, I'd suppressed my anger, convinced myself that good mothers didn't get angry at their children, that anger was somehow incompatible with love. But standing in the ruins of my home, I finally understood that anger could be righteous. Anger could be necessary. Anger could be the thing that finally pushed you to choose yourself over the people who were destroying you. Before we left, I stood in the center of my destroyed living room and made a decision. I was going to press charges. I was going to get a restraining order. I was going to sell this house, these damaged walls that I could never unsee, and use the money to build a different kind of life. Not the life I'd planned. Not the life I'd dreamed of when Cassandra was a little girl hugging me tight on Cape Cod, but a life that was mine. As Martin pulled out of the driveway, I looked back at the house one final time. The sun was setting, casting the windows in amber light. From the outside, it still looked like a home, but I knew better now. Home wasn't just walls and a roof. Home was where people treated you with love and respect, and that house hadn't been home for a very long time. "You're doing the right thing," Martin said quietly as we drove north. "I know," I replied, and for the first time in years, I actually believed it. Chapter 5. The legal battle Christmas came and went quietly in Maine. Beth put up a small tree in the living room, and we exchanged modest gifts. Martin gave me a beautiful wooden jewelry box he'd made himself to replace the one Cassandra had stolen. Beth gave me a journal with a hand-painted cover and a note inside that said, "For all the chapters of your new story." I cried when I read it, but they were different tears than I'd shed before, tears of gratitude rather than grief. I spent most of December working with my lawyer, Diane Morrison, to build the case. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, who'd handled dozens of family property disputes, and didn't mince words about my situation. "Mrs. Ashford, I want to manage your expectations," she said during one of our calls. "Criminal charges for family members are difficult. Even with clear evidence of vandalism and assault, prosecutors are often reluctant to pursue cases against adult children who damaged their parents' property. The system sees it as a family matter that should be resolved privately." "But I tried resolving it privately," I said, frustrated. "That's what got me here. Years of trying to handle things privately, of making excuses, of protecting her from consequences. Look where that got me." "I understand your frustration, and you're absolutely right. The pattern of escalating behavior is clear. We'll file the charges and push as hard as we can. At minimum, we'll get that restraining order. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Cassandra won't face serious legal consequences." That reality was hard to swallow. The justice system that should have protected me was more interested in preserving the illusion of family harmony than actually holding people accountable. But Diane was determined to try. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for early January. It would be the first time I'd seen Cassandra since that November morning when she'd thrown coffee at me. The thought made my stomach churn with anxiety, but I steeled myself. I had to face her eventually. I had to look her in the eye and stand by my decision. Martin offered to come with me, but I declined. "This is something I need to do alone," I told him. "I've spent too long hiding behind other people, letting others fight my battles. If I'm going to take back my life, I need to start by facing this myself." The courthouse in Hartford was cold and impersonal, all marble floors and fluorescent lights. I arrived 30 minutes early and sat on a hard bench outside the courtroom, my testimony notes clutched in my hands. I'd written down everything: the years of financial manipulation, the verbal abuse, the coffee incident, the destruction of my home, facts, dates, details, all the evidence of what my family had become. Cassandra arrived 5 minutes before the hearing, accompanied by a lawyer I didn't recognize. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face pinched and angry. When she saw me, her expression twisted into something ugly, contempt mixed with something that might have been pain. For just a moment, I saw my little girl in her face, the one who'd hugged me tight on Cape Cod. Then it was gone, replaced by the stranger who'd destroyed my home. She didn't approach me or speak to me. We sat on opposite sides of the hallway like enemies before a battle, which I suppose we were. Inside the courtroom, the judge was an older man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened carefully as I recounted the pattern of abuse, showing the photographs of my burned arm, the police report from the vandalism, bank statements showing the thousands of dollars I'd given over the years. I kept my voice steady, refusing to cry despite the tears that threatened. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for facts. Cassandra's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive mother who was punishing her daughter for seeking independence. He claimed the property damage was an unfortunate overreaction to my sudden and cruel decision to evict her without warning. He suggested that the coffee incident was an accident, that the mug had slipped from Cassandra's hand during a heated but normal family disagreement. I watched Cassandra as her lawyer spoke, looking for some sign of remorse, some flicker of the daughter I'd raised. There was none. She sat with her arms crossed, her expression hard, as if I were the one who had wronged her. When the judge asked if she had anything to say in her own defense, Cassandra stood. Her voice was cold and controlled. "Your Honor, my mother has always been unstable. Since my father died, she's become increasingly paranoid and controlling. I tried to help her, tried to take care of her, and this is how she repays me. She's making up stories to justify abandoning her own family. The lies came so easily to her that I almost believed I was listening to a stranger's story rather than my own. Was this really how she saw things? Did she actually believe her own version of events? Or was this pure manipulation?" The judge looked at her for a long moment, then at the photographs of my destroyed home, then back at me. "Ms. Hargrove," he said to Cassandra, using her married name, "you're asking me to believe that your 68-year-old mother, who has no history of mental illness or violent behavior, suddenly became paranoid enough to falsify assault reports, stage property damage, and seek a restraining order, all as some form of revenge for you trying to help her." Cassandra's lawyer started to speak, but the judge held up his hand. "I'm granting the restraining order. Ms. Hargrove, You are to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from Mrs. Ashford at all times. No contact, direct or indirect, for a period of 1 year. This court finds sufficient evidence of harassment and assault to warrant protection. If you violate this order, you will be arrested. Do you understand?" Cassandra's face went white, then red. "This is ridiculous." "She's my mother, and you assaulted her," the judge said calmly, "and vandalized her property. Being someone's mother doesn't give you the right to abuse them, Miss Hargrove. Mrs. Ashford, I'm also recommending that the district attorney review this case for possible criminal prosecution. The level of property damage documented here goes well beyond a family dispute." As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of victory and emptiness. I'd won, legally speaking, but what had I actually won? A piece of paper that said my daughter couldn't come near me. The erasure of a relationship that had once been the center of my world. Cassandra pushed past me in the hallway, her shoulder deliberately bumping mine. Her lawyer grabbed her arm and pulled her away, whispering urgently. I caught fragments. Making it worse. And criminal charges. She shook him off and turned back to face me one last time. "I hope you're happy," she spat. "You've destroyed this family. You've chosen a house over your own daughter and grandson. When you're old and dying alone, remember this was your choice." Before I could respond, not that I knew what I would have said, her lawyer physically turned her away and rushed her toward the exit. I stood frozen in the hallway, her words echoing in my head. Had I destroyed the family? Was this my fault? Diane appeared beside me, her hand gentle on my elbow. "Don't listen to that, Mrs. Ashford. That's manipulation. Pure and simple. You didn't destroy anything. You protected yourself from people who were destroying you. There's a difference." I knew she was right intellectually, but emotionally, I felt gutted. No matter how clearly I could see Cassandra's behavior for what it was, she was still my daughter. That bond doesn't just break cleanly, it tears. And the tearing hurts more than any physical wound. On the drive back to Maine, I kept replaying the hearing in my mind. One detail stuck with me. When the judge had said, "assaulted her," Cassandra hadn't denied it. She hadn't claimed it was an accident, or that I was exaggerating. She'd just gotten angry that there were consequences. That realization settled something in me. I hadn't imagined the abuse. I hadn't overreacted. I had simply finally stopped accepting the unacceptable. 2 weeks after the hearing, Diane called with unexpected news. The district attorney's office has decided to pursue criminal charges against Cassandra. 2 counts of malicious destruction of property and 1 count of assault and battery. I know this might be difficult for you, but given the severity of the damage and the assault, they felt prosecution was warranted. My mouth went dry. What does that mean? What happens now? She'll be arraigned, probably enter a plea. If she pleads not guilty, there will be a trial. If she pleads guilty or accepts a plea deal, she'll face sentencing, likely probation, restitution to cover your damages, and possibly community service. Jail time is unlikely for a first offense, but it's possible. First offense. As if there hadn't been years of offenses, just ones that hadn't been documented by police reports and court orders. Do I have to testify? Probably, yes. But Mrs. Ashford, you don't have to do this if it's too much. We can tell the DA you're unwilling to cooperate with prosecution. Without your testimony, the case becomes much weaker. I thought about the destroyed quilt my grandmother had made, the shredded photos of Gregory, the obscenities spray-painted on my bedroom wall, the burned scar on my arm that would never fully fade. I thought about years of being treated like an ATM, of having my boundaries trampled, of living in fear in my own home. I'll testify, I said. She needs to face what she's done. And maybe, I thought, but didn't say, I need to face it too. I need to stand up in a court of law and say out loud what my daughter did to me. I need to stop making excuses and stop protecting her from reality, because that protection hadn't helped her. It had only enabled her to become someone capable of such cruelty. The arraignment was scheduled for February. I would have to see Cassandra again, hear her plead to charges that stemmed from her hatred of me. The thought made me sick, but I was learning that sometimes the right path is the one that makes your stomach churn. That night, I added a new entry in the journal Beth had given me. Today, I chose myself again. It still hurts. Maybe it will always hurt. But I'm choosing me. And Chapter 6, The Trial and the Truth. Winter in Maine was harsh that year. with storms that buried Harpswell under feet of snow and winds that howled through the night. I found the weather oddly comforting. It matched the internal storm I was weathering, and there was something honest about nature's fierceness. No pretending, no manipulation, just raw force that you had to respect and endure. Cassandra's arraignment came and went. She pleaded not guilty to all charges, which Diane had predicted. "She's going to fight this," Diane explained. "She probably believes she can win, or at least that you'll drop the charges before it goes to trial." "I won't," I said firmly. "I know, but she doesn't know the new you yet. The new me. Was I really different? Or was I just finally becoming who I should have been all along? I wasn't sure, but I liked who I was becoming. Someone who said no when necessary, who set boundaries and enforced them, who didn't apologize for taking up space in her own life. I spent February preparing for the trial, scheduled for early March. Diane coached me on testimony, helping me stick to facts without getting pulled into emotional tangles. We reviewed the evidence methodically: photographs, bank statements, police reports, medical records from my burn treatment, the paper trail of my daughter's destruction. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, who specialized in family trauma. Martin had suggested it, and initially, I resisted. I didn't want to think of my situation as trauma. That word felt too heavy, too dramatic. But Dr. Chen helped me understand that abuse doesn't have to be dramatic to be real, and trauma is just your body and mind's response to experiences that overwhelmed your ability to cope. "You've been living in survival mode for years," Dr. Chen explained during one session, "constantly trying to manage Cassandra's moods, prevent explosions, keep the peace. That's exhausting, and it rewires your brain. You started to believe that your job was to make her happy, even at the cost of your own well-being. How do I undo that?" I asked. "By continuing what you're already doing, setting boundaries, choosing yourself, learning to trust your own judgment again, and by grieving the relationship you thought you had, so you can eventually accept the relationship you actually have." The grief part was hardest. I was grieving my daughter while she was still alive, still out there somewhere living her life. I grieved the little girl she'd been, the relationship I'd believed we had, the future I'd imagined where she'd care for me in my old age the way I'd cared for her. All of it was fantasy, and letting go of those fantasies felt like dying a little. The trial began on a gray March morning. Spring hadn't arrived yet in Connecticut, and patches of old snow still clung to the courthouse steps. I wore a simple navy dress and the pearl earrings Gregory had given me on our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look dignified, put together, not like the unstable, paranoid person Cassandra's defense would try to paint me as. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with maybe 20 seats for spectators. Martin and Beth were there, sitting in the front row behind the prosecutor's table. I'd asked them not to come, not wanting to burden them further, but Martin had refused. "You stood alone too long, Penny. We're here now." Cassandra arrived with her lawyer, a slick-looking man in his 30s named Timothy Marsh. She wore a modest dress, her hair pulled back, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had at the restraining order hearing. A calculated choice, I realized. She was playing the part of the devoted daughter wronged by her unreasonable mother. The prosecutor, a woman named Sandra Wallace, was methodical and professional. She laid out the case piece by piece, the pattern of financial exploitation, the assault with the coffee, my formal eviction notice, and then the devastating vandalism. She showed the jury photographs of my destroyed home, and I watched their faces change as they processed the level of damage. This wasn't an argument that got out of hand. This was deliberate, vindictive destruction. When it was my turn to testify, my hands were shaking as I placed them on the Bible to swear to tell the truth. I looked at the jury. 7 women and 5 men, most middle-aged or older. Several looked like they could be grandparents. I hoped they'd understand. Sandra Wallace guided me through my testimony gently but thoroughly. I explained the years of financial demands, the lack of gratitude or reciprocation, the way Cassandra and Trevor had treated my home like a hotel. I described the morning of the coffee incident in detail, the argument, Cassandra's escalating anger, the moment she threw the hot coffee at me. I showed them my arm, where the burn scar was still visible, lighter than the surrounding skin. "Mrs. Ashford, why didn't you call the police that day?" Sandra asked. "Because she's my daughter," I said simply. I kept thinking that if I just set better boundaries, If I communicated more clearly, things would get better. I didn't want to believe that my own child could deliberately hurt me. And when you discovered the state of your home after you'd asked them to leave, my voice wavered. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This wasn't just mess or carelessness. They destroyed things that couldn't be replaced. My mother's quilts, photos of my late husband, books he'd collected. They spray-painted obscenities on my bedroom wall. It was meant to hurt me as much as possible. Then came the cross-examination. Timothy Marsh approached with a sympathetic expression that immediately put me on guard. "Mrs. Ashford, you love your daughter, don't you?" "I do," I said honestly. "But love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Abuse is a strong word. Isn't it true that you and Cassandra simply had different expectations about family obligations? That she felt you should be more generous, and you felt she should be more independent?" "No," I said firmly. "Different expectations would be disagreeing about how often we should visit or what to have for holiday dinners. Throwing hot coffee at your mother's arm and destroying her home isn't a difference in expectations. It's violence." He tried various angles, suggesting my grief over Gregory had made me emotionally unstable, implying that I'd exaggerated the damage for insurance purposes, hinting that I'd never really wanted Cassandra and Trevor living with me and was looking for an excuse to kick them out. With each suggestion, I stayed calm and factual, letting the evidence speak for itself. The hardest moment came when Cassandra took the stand in her own defense. I had to sit there and listen as she told an alternate version of our story, one where she was the caring daughter trying to help her aging, difficult mother, where the coffee incident was an accident during a heated discussion, where the property damage was emotional reaction to being suddenly and cruelly evicted from her childhood home. "My mother changed after my father died," Cassandra said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "She became withdrawn, suspicious. She started accusing us of using her for money when we were just trying to survive. I was between jobs, trying to support my son through college. We needed help, and she turned her back on us. It was such a skillful manipulation of the truth that for a moment, I almost doubted myself. Had I been unreasonable? Was I remembering things wrong? But then Sandra Wallace stood for cross-examination, holding up one of the photographs of my bedroom wall, covered in red spray-painted profanities. "Miss Hargrove, you've described your property damage as an emotional reaction. Can you explain to the jury what emotion causes someone to spray-paint obscenities on their mother's bedroom wall?" Cassandra's composure cracked slightly. "I was upset. She'd thrown us out with nowhere to go. You had 30 days notice, correct? That's hardly nowhere to go. And the notice was delivered after she'd set boundaries around lending you money, and you responded by throwing hot coffee at her. That was an accident." Sandra held up the police report. "According to this report, your mother described you yelling, 'Give me the money or leave,' and then throwing the coffee. That doesn't sound accidental. She's exaggerating. She's always been dramatic. Are the photographs of her burned arm dramatic? Is the medical report from urgent care dramatic? Are the thousands of dollars you withdrew from her bank account over 3 years dramatic?" The jury was watching Cassandra closely now, and I could see doubt in their faces. They'd seen the evidence. They'd heard the details. Timothy Marsh tried to rehabilitate her testimony during redirect, but the damage was done. The trial lasted 4 days. 4 days of reliving the worst moments of my life, of having my relationship with my daughter dissected in public, of facing the woman who'd hurt me and hearing her deny, minimize, and twist every truth. By the time closing arguments came, I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Sandra Wallace's closing argument was powerful. She laid out the pattern clearly: years of exploitation, escalating to violence, culminating in vindictive destruction. "This isn't a family disagreement," she told the jury. "This is a pattern of abuse." Mrs. Ashford did what many abuse victims never managed to do. She stood up for herself. She set a boundary. And Cassandra Hargrove responded with violence and destruction. "That's not love. That's not family. That's a crime." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with their verdict, I felt like I might faint. The foreman, an older man with a gentle face, stood and read, "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." Cassandra's face went white. Timothy Marsh put his hand on her shoulder, but she shook him off. She turned to look at me, and for just a moment, I saw something in her eyes that might have been recognition, an acknowledgement of what she'd done, but then it was gone. replaced by anger. "You've destroyed this family," she said, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. "I'll never forgive you for this." The judge banged his gavel. "Ms. Hargrove, that's enough. Sentencing will be scheduled for 3 weeks from today. Until then, you'll remain free on bail." As the courtroom emptied, I sat in my seat, unable to move. Martin and Beth surrounded me, offering comfort, but I felt numb. I'd won, in the legal sense. But what had I actually won? "You did the right thing," Martin said quietly. "You protected yourself. You held her accountable." I nodded, but inside, I was breaking. Because accountability didn't change the fundamental truth. My daughter hated me. My daughter had looked me in the eye and said she'd never forgive me. Not for what she'd done, but for refusing to let her keep doing it. That night, back in Martin's guest room in Maine, I cried until I had nothing left. I cried for the daughter I'd lost, for the relationship that would never be repaired, for all the years I'd spent hoping things would change. I cried for myself at 68, starting over alone, without the family I'd thought I'd have in my old age. But when morning came, I got up. I made coffee. I watched the sun rise over Casco Bay, and I kept going, because that's what you do. You grieve, and then you survive, and then, eventually, you start to live again. Chapter 7. Sentencing and Separation. The 3 weeks between the verdict and sentencing felt both endless and too short. Part of me wanted it over with, wanted the final chapter of this legal nightmare closed so I could begin whatever came next. Another part dreaded facing Cassandra again, hearing whatever venom she might spew, seeing the reality of her consequences made concrete. I spent those weeks in an odd state of limbo. Diane called to discuss the sentencing hearing and what to expect. The prosecution was recommending a suspended jail sentence with probation, mandatory counseling, and full restitution for the property damage, nearly $35,000, and the contractor's estimate for repairing my home. And will she actually pay it? I asked Diane. That's the question, isn't it? If she doesn't, her probation can be revoked, which means jail time. But collecting restitution from someone who claims to have no money is difficult. You may end up with a judgment you can never fully collect on. I'd already accepted that the money was likely gone forever. The real currency I cared about was justice, acknowledgement, the official record that what happened to me was wrong. That mattered more than any dollar amount. Dr. Chen helped me process the complex emotions that came with the verdict. I expected to feel relieved, vindicated even. Instead, I felt hollow. "You're grieving," Dr. Chen explained. "The verdict made it official. The relationship you thought you had with Cassandra doesn't exist, and probably never did. That's a profound loss, and it's okay to mourn it. But I'm the one who pursued charges. I'm the one who testified against her. How can I feel sad about consequences I chose? And because humans are complicated, and love doesn't just shut off because someone hurts you, you can simultaneously believe you did the right thing and feel devastated by having to do it. Both things are true." I thought about that a lot. The idea that multiple contradictory truths could exist at once. I was right to protect myself, and I was heartbroken that protection required destroying my relationship with my daughter. She was guilty of real crimes, and she was still the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, sung lullabies to, bandaged scraped knees for. All of it was true. The sentencing hearing arrived on a cold, bright April morning. Spring was finally coming to Connecticut. Crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow. Trees beginning to bud. The world was renewing itself just as my old life was definitively ending. The courtroom was the same, but it felt different. Smaller somehow. Less charged. This was just administrative. The formal delivery of consequences already decided. Timothy Marsh was there with Cassandra, both looking resigned. On the prosecution side, Sandra Wallace had her file organized, ready to make her recommendations. The judge, the same older man with kind eyes, asked if anyone wanted to make a statement before sentencing. Sandra indicated that I'd prepared victim impact statement. My hands shook as I stood and walked to the podium. I'd written and rewritten the statement a dozen times. Initially, it had been angry, full of accusations and demands for maximum punishment. Then it had been sorrowful, full of reminiscences about the daughter I'd lost. Finally, I'd settled on something simpler. The truth. "Your Honor, members of the court," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, I'm 68 years old. I spent the last 42 years as Cassandra's mother. I changed her diapers, taught her to read, sat up with her through sicknesses, celebrated her achievements, comforted her heartbreaks. I loved her with everything I had. I still do, even though I know I shouldn't. What Cassandra did to me wasn't a mistake or an accident. It was deliberate, calculated cruelty. She hurt me because I finally said no to her demands. She destroyed my home because I set a boundary. And she's never once said she's sorry. Not for throwing coffee at me, not for the vandalism, not for any of it. I don't want her to go to jail. I don't take any joy in her suffering. But I need her to understand that her actions have consequences. I need her to take responsibility for what she's done. And I need to know that if she ever tries to hurt me again, there will be legal protection in place. I've lost my daughter through this process. That's a grief I'll carry for the rest of my life. But I refuse to lose myself too. I refuse to teach her that abusing people who love you is acceptable. So I stand by the verdict, and I ask the court to impose a sentence that reflects the seriousness of what she's done. I sat down, trembling. Martin squeezed my hand. Across the aisle, Cassandra stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched, refusing to look at me. The judge then asked if Cassandra wanted to speak. Timothy Marsh whispered urgently to her, probably advising her to show remorse, to apologize, to say something that might reduce her sentence. She shook her head and stood. "I have nothing to say," she said flatly. "My mother has made her choice. She chose revenge over family. I'm done." The judge's expression hardened slightly. "Ms. Hargrove, this court has shown you considerable leniency by not imposing immediate jail time. If you choose to show no remorse, no accountability, you're making future leniency unlikely. Do you understand that?" "I understand that my mother destroyed this family and is now destroying me. That's what I understand." Timothy Marsh physically pulled her back into her seat, his face flushed with frustration. The damage was done. Any sympathy the judge might have felt evaporated in the face of her defiance. "Very well," the judge said. "Cassandra Hargrove, you are hereby sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation. During this time, you will complete 200 hours of community service, attend mandatory anger management counseling, and have no contact with the victim, Penelope Ashford. You are ordered to pay full restitution in the amount of $34,872. This amount will be paid in monthly installments of $500, beginning 30 days from today. I want to be clear, Ms. Hargrove. If you violate any term of this probation, if you contact Mrs. Ashford, if you fail to complete community service, if you miss counseling sessions, if you fail to make restitution payments, you will serve the suspended jail sentence of 18 months. Do you understand?" "Yes," Cassandra said, her voice hard. "Then we're adjourned." The gavel came down with a finality that echoed in my chest. It was over. The legal battle, the testimony, the public examination of my broken family, all over. Cassandra would walk out of this courtroom, and I would walk out too, but we would never walk together again. As people gathered their things and filed out, I stayed seated, trying to process what had just happened. 2 years of probation, community service, counseling, restitution she probably couldn't pay. Was it enough? Was it justice? I honestly didn't know. Cassandra left without looking at me. Timothy Marsh followed, his briefcase clutched tight. Sandra Wallace came over to shake my hand. "You did well, Mrs. Ashford." The statement was perfect, honest without being vindictive. "I hope this brings you some closure." Closure. Such a strange word for something that felt more like amputation than conclusion. Outside the courthouse, the spring sun was warm on my face. Martin and Beth flanked me, providing solid support as we walked to the car. None of us spoke. What was there to say? That evening, back at Martin's house, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge what I'd known for weeks, but hadn't wanted to admit. I couldn't go back to Connecticut. My house, even after repairs, would always be the place Cassandra had vandalized. The town would always be where neighbors had seen police cars at my house, where people would whisper about the mother and daughter who'd gone to court. I needed a fresh start, somewhere without those ghosts. "I'm going to sell the house," I announced over dinner. Martin and Beth exchanged glances but didn't seem surprised. "Where will you go?" Beth asked gently. "I don't know yet. Somewhere new. Maybe somewhere warm, where winter doesn't last half the year. Somewhere I can be Penelope Ashford. Not That woman whose daughter, you know? We know, Martin said, and wherever you decide, you know you're always welcome here for as long as you want. This is your home too, if you want it to be. His kindness made my eyes sting with tears. After everything Cassandra had put me through, Martin's unconditional support reminded me that family wasn't just about blood. It was about who showed up, who cared, who treated you with respect. That night, I opened my laptop and started researching places to live. I looked at small towns in the Carolinas, retirement communities in Florida, charming cities in Arizona. The world felt suddenly huge and full of possibilities. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in decades, my life was entirely my own to shape. I pulled out the journal Beth had given me and wrote, "Today the court said Cassandra was guilty, but I think I've been guilty too. Guilty of not valuing myself enough, of accepting crumbs and calling it love, of staying too long in situations that hurt me. That guilt ends now. Tomorrow, I start choosing me." The next morning, I called a realtor in Connecticut and put my house on the market. The repairs would be finished within a month, and then it would be someone else's home, someone else's memories. I was ready to let it go, not just the physical structure, but everything it represented. Selling the house felt like shedding old skin, necessary, slightly painful, but ultimately freeing. I was becoming someone new, someone who'd survived the worst and come out the other side different, but not destroyed. As I boxed up the few belongings I'd salvaged from the destruction, Gregory's favorite coffee mug that had somehow survived, a few photo albums, some books, I found myself crying again. But these weren't tears of devastation. They were tears of release, of finally letting go of the life I'd thought I'd have and embracing the uncertainty of whatever came next. Cassandra had tried to destroy me. She'd failed. I was still here, still standing, still choosing to move forward. That, I realized, was my victory. Not the guilty verdict or the sentencing, but the simple fact that I'd survived her worst and was still capable of hope. Dapper. Chapter 8. Rebuilding. May brought warm weather and unexpected clarity. My house in Connecticut sold within 3 weeks of listing. A young family bought it, delighted by the new renovations. They didn't know the history behind those repairs, and I didn't tell them. Let them fill those rooms with happier memories. The sale netted me about $240,000 after paying off the remaining debts, the repair costs, and the realtor's commission. It wasn't a fortune, but combined with my savings and Gregory's life insurance, it was enough to buy something modest and comfortable somewhere new, with money left over for security. I spent hours researching potential places to relocate. Martin and Beth kept insisting I could stay with them permanently, but I needed my own space. I loved them for offering, but I was learning that independence wasn't selfish. It was necessary for self-respect. After weeks of research, I narrowed it down to 3 possibilities. Asheville, North Carolina, for its arts community and mountain beauty. St. Augustine, Florida, for its history and coastal charm. And Prescott, Arizona, for its mild climate and small-town feel. I decided to visit all 3 before deciding. Road trip? Beth suggested one evening. We could make it an adventure, the 3 of us, seeing the country, exploring your options. And so, in mid-May, we loaded Martin's car and headed south. It felt oddly liberating to be traveling with no agenda except exploration, no obligations except to ourselves. We stopped at quirky roadside attractions, ate at local diners, stayed in small bed and breakfasts. For the first time in years, I felt light. Asheville enchanted me immediately. The mountain air was crisp and clean, the downtown vibrant with galleries, bookstores, and cafes. I toured several senior-friendly condos and small houses, imagining myself living there, morning walks through the historic neighborhoods, afternoons at the public library, evenings at community theater performances. St. Augustine was beautiful in a different way, all Spanish colonial architecture and ocean breezes. I walked along the beach at sunrise, feeling the warm sand under my feet, watching dolphins arc through the waves. The history lover in me adored exploring the old fort and cobblestone streets. I looked at several properties near the historic district, charmed by the idea of living somewhere so steeped in story. But it was Prescott, Arizona, that captured my heart. Something about the high desert landscape, the red rocks, The ponderosa pines, the vast blue sky spoke to me. The town itself was unpretentious and welcoming, with a historic courthouse square, independent shops, and a strong sense of community. The climate was perfect, 4 mild seasons without harsh winters or oppressive summers. I found a small house on a quiet street near downtown, built in the 1950s with a covered front porch and a backyard full of native plants. It had 2 bedrooms, a sunroom perfect for reading, and a kitchen with windows overlooking the mountains. The moment I walked through the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Home. This is it. I told Martin and Beth. This is where I want to start over. The owner, a widow named Dorothy who was moving to be closer to her daughter in California, gave me a knowing look when I told her my story, a heavily edited version that left out the ugliest parts. Starting over at our age takes courage, she said, but sometimes starting over is the bravest thing we can do. I think you'll be happy here, Penelope. Prescott's good to women who need a fresh start. By the end of June, the house was mine. Martin and Beth helped me move what little I had, and then we spent a week shopping for furniture and essentials. I chose carefully, deliberately, making sure everything I brought into my new home was chosen by me, for me. No compromises, no accommodating anyone else's taste, just mine. My first night alone in the Prescott house, I sat on the front porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The silence was profound. No traffic noise, no shouting, no tension crackling through the air, just peace. I pulled out my phone and looked at the messages I'd been ignoring for weeks. 36 texts from Cassandra, sent before the restraining order was finalized. They followed a predictable pattern: rage, then manipulation, then threats, then attempts at reconciliation, then back to rage. I'd read them once and then archived them, unable to delete them completely, but unwilling to engage. The most recent one, sent 2 weeks ago, simply said, "I'll never forgive you for what you've done. You're dead to me." I sat with that message for a long time, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Dead to her. Part of me wanted to respond, to defend myself, to explain one more time that I'd simply set boundaries and she'd chosen violence. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Cassandra didn't want understanding. She wanted capitulation. So instead, I deleted the messages. All of them. I blocked her number. I chose to let her go completely, not with anger, but with a sad acceptance that some relationships are too broken to fix, and trying only causes more damage. Dr. Chen had warned me about this moment. There will come a time when you have to decide if you're going to keep the door open or close it completely. Neither choice is wrong, but you need to be honest with yourself about what you can handle. I knew now that I couldn't handle the constant emotional whiplash of Cassandra's contact, the hope that maybe this time would be different, followed by the crushing disappointment when it wasn't. I needed to close the door, not out of vengeance but out of self-preservation. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The months that followed were a revelation. I joined a book club at the local library and met women my age who became genuine friends, women who didn't want anything from me except companionship and conversation. I volunteered at a community garden, learning about desert plants and finding unexpected joy in making things grow. I took a watercolor class and discovered I had a modest talent for painting landscapes. I also continued therapy with a new counselor in Prescott, Dr. Michael Torres, who specialized in late-life transitions and family estrangement. He helped me work through the lingering guilt that surfaced at odd moments, when I saw mothers and daughters shopping together, when holidays approached, when I caught myself reaching for my phone to call Cassandra before remembering. Guilt is a sign of your capacity for love, Dr. Torres explained, but it shouldn't be a tool for self-punishment. You feel guilty because you still care, and that's human, but caring doesn't mean you should have accepted abuse. Slowly, painfully, I began to internalize that truth. I could love Cassandra and still maintain boundaries. I could miss who I'd hoped she'd be while accepting who she actually was. I could choose peace over reconciliation without being a bad mother. In October, nearly a year after that morning with the coffee, I received a letter forwarded from my old Connecticut address. The return address was from a prison in Rhode Island. My heart sank. Had Cassandra's probation been revoked? Had something happened to Trevor? I opened it with shaking hands. It wasn't from Cassandra. It was from Trevor. "Dear Grandma," it began. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I know I don't deserve your attention after how we treated you, but I wanted you to know something. You were right about everything. Mom's in jail. She violated probation by trying to contact you. She had a friend send texts from their phone, missing counseling sessions, and never paying the restitution. They revoked her probation last month, and she's serving the 18-month sentence. I'm writing because I've had a lot of time to think this past year. I dropped out of college, couldn't afford it without your help. And I was failing anyway because I'd never learned to work for anything. I got a job at a warehouse, found a cheap apartment with roommates. It's been hard, but it's also been clarifying. I realized that Mom and I treated you terribly. We used you, disrespected you, and when you finally stood up for yourself, we punished you for it. I was 19 years old, legally an adult, and I stood there and watched my mother throw coffee at you and did nothing. That makes me complicit. That makes me guilty too. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship, but I needed you to know that I see it now. I see what we did, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I hope you're happy, wherever you are. I hope you're living the life you deserve, surrounded by people who treat you with respect. I hope you never think about us, because we don't deserve space in your thoughts. You were a good grandmother. You were a good mother to Mom, even though she couldn't see it. The fault was never yours. It was always ours. With love and regret, Trevor. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This was what I'd wanted. Acknowledgement, accountability, proof that I wasn't crazy or cruel for protecting myself. But now that I had it, it didn't feel victorious. It just felt sad. Trevor saw the truth now, but only after it was too late. Cassandra was in jail, and even now, according to Trevor's letter, she blamed me rather than taking responsibility. And I was here in Arizona, building a life that didn't include either of them. I didn't respond to Trevor's letter immediately. I needed time to sit with it, to figure out what, if anything, I wanted to say. Dr. Torres encouraged me to take my time, to not feel pressured to offer forgiveness or reconciliation, just because Trevor had apologized. An apology doesn't obligate you to anything, he reminded me. You can acknowledge his growth without reopening a relationship that might hurt you. After 2 weeks of consideration, I wrote back. A short letter, kind but boundaried. Trevor, thank you for your letter. I'm glad you've gained perspective and are taking responsibility for your choices. That takes courage. I forgive you, because holding anger only hurts me, not you. But forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to how they were. I'm building a new life now, one based on peace and self-respect. I can't include people in that life who've hurt me, even if they're sorry now. I hope you continue to grow and learn. I hope you build a life you're proud of. I hope someday you'll understand that sometimes love means letting go. Take care of yourself. Grandma Penelope. I mailed it and felt a weight lift. I'd said what needed saying without being cruel or closing myself off to his growth. And I'd maintained my boundary. Kindness didn't require sacrificing my peace.